Okay, chapter 6 and 7. We return to the Rostovs, and it's an exciting scene. Family gets a letter from Nikolai, and at first it's secret they feel it necessary to prepare the mother because she's been presumably quite emotionally distraught of her son being at war. But first I really liked a couple little passages about Natasha. She's kind of a pretty likable character for me. She hints that something's up. She approaches Anna, says like, what's going on? What's going on? You know something? And Anna tells her, but asks her not to tell until they've kind of spilled the news to her mother. Natasha says, truly, on my word of honor, said Natasha, crossing herself, I won't tell a soul. And she ran off to find Sonia. I like that. And then a little bit later, so she tells Sonia, and Sonia expresses her love for Nikolai once again. Natasha gazed at Sonia with inquisitive, wondering eyes and said nothing. She felt that what Sonia had said was the truth, that there was such love, but she herself had never experienced anything like it. She believed in it without understanding it. Kind of like that a little bit as well. And then there's a kind of a touching thing with the mother. After she finds this letter, she's holding the letter, she's rereading it, and friends are coming and it's being read. Each time the Countess reread the letter with fresh delight, each time discovering new virtues in her Nikolushka. How strange, how extraordinary and joyous it seemed to her that her son, whose tiny limbs had faintly stirred within her 20 years ago. The growth of her son had been for her at every stage as extraordinary as though millions and millions of men had not already developed in the same way. Just as 20 years before it had seemed unbelievable that this little creature lying under her heart would ever cry, nurse at the breast, or talk. So now she could not believe that this same little creature could be that strong, brave officer, that paragon of sons and men, which, judging by his letter, he now was. Anyway, I found that a little bit of a touching few paragraphs. And then we shift so that was chapter 6. In chapter 7, we shift the context where Nikolai is, and there's a number of people here. We see Nikolai, Berg is here, Boris is there, and even Andrei makes an appearance. And so the family sent letters back to Nikolai, somehow through Boris, and then maybe a little bit with the help of Andrei. Boris knew Andrei, and Andrei was kind of kind to him. And there's a few little interactions here I'm going to highlight, but then I really want to spend time with Andrei. So first there's Nicholas and Boris meeting again after having spent some time in the war, and I found this paragraph interesting. It was almost 3 months since they had seen each other, and being at an age when young men take their first steps on the path of life, each found immense changes in the other, quite new reflections of the society in which they had taken those steps. Both had changed greatly since their last meeting, and both were in haste to display these changes. You know how it is. It's kind of like, I figured stuff out. I know all this stuff. I got my shit together. And then you change a little bit, and it's kind of like, wow, I really figured out a lot more, and I really now know stuff or something. I know that might not be the right way to say it, but you're just excited about these, just in weeks and months, making these kind of grand life discoveries and eager to share them, especially with your friends. And then it's interesting here, we start getting these hints of Rostov. And so before I was wondering, how have these events, being in the war, what's the potential for them to change these men, especially thinking of Andrei and Rostov. And we start getting these hints here with both of them, I think, actually. And so Rostov's showing off his medal, I think, for being injured. How are you? You've been under fire already. And without answering, Rostov pointed to his bandaged arm, flicked the St. George cross that hung from the cording of his uniform in so soldierly fashion, and glanced at Berg with a smile. And so we know totally what happened with Rostov. I mean, there was nothing heroic about his injury or his thing in the battle, but it's kind of just, it's been absorbed somehow as all's good. I behaved heroically. I was a part of the battle. And so there's kind of a disconnect as us as readers knowing all these situations in which Rostov was completely useless in the battle in both instances that he was there, and his injury was just a matter of him falling off his horse and so on. But he's quite proud of his medal, and then he goes on, and there's a scene where he starts explaining to the others. It was either Boris or Berg asked him, "Tell us how you received your wound." This pleased Rostov, and he began to tell them about it, growing more and more impassioned as he talked. He described the Schöngrabern action exactly as men who have taken part in battles generally do describe them. That is, as they would like them to have been, as they have heard them described by others, and making them sound more glorious and quite unlike what they actually were. And here's a key thing. Rostov was a truthful young man, and I think this is a good and accurate statement of him. And he would on no account have told a deliberate lie. He began with the intention of relating everything exactly as it happened, but imperceptibly, unconsciously, and inevitably, he slipped into falsehood. And so I just find this a very good, well-written couple paragraphs. And it just goes on to describe how he sort of, he embellishes the story quite a bit, actually. He could not tell them simply that everyone had set out at a trot, that he had fallen from his horse, sprained his arm, and then he had run away from the French into the woods as fast as his legs could carry. And so he's quite animated by this, and he's being deceptive about it. But I think there's an accuracy to say there's some unconsciousness in the embellishing. Maybe some of it is a little bit unconscious or conscious, but not to the point where you would think of yourself, I'm being deceitful. And so in the middle of this, Prince Andrei comes into the room because he has been helping Boris. And it says here, Prince Andrei enjoyed being a patron to young people. So he's not too much older than them, but he's older enough, and was flattered by an appeal to his influence and being well disposed to Boris, who had succeeded in making a favorable impression on him the day before. And so Prince Andrei comes into the room, and immediately he knows what's going on. Here's a young soldier just embellishing his story and his heroics, and Prince Andrei sees right through him. And Rostov senses this right away. He knows he's like vulnerable. He's in the presence of this new fella who's here, and immediately, Rostov's mind is like in conflict, kind of unconsciously. And so the natural thing to do is to be defensive, and he's hostile towards Prince Andrei. I kind of kind of like how that's all described. And the scene goes on, and Andrei, after glancing around the room, he turned to Rostov, whose state of childish, ungovernable confusion had now changed to anger. And Andrei asked him, I believe you were talking about the Schöngrabern engagement, were you not? I was, said Rostov irately, as if wanting to insult the adjutant. Bolkonsky was aware of the hussar's state of mind, and it amused him. He smiled disdainfully. And it goes on, and they have this interaction. Rostov was filled with a strange feeling of rage mingled with respect for this man's self-possession. And so I find this interesting, this whole thing, because so we see Rostov. How has Rostov changed because of the battle? Well, he hasn't really changed. He's a young, energetic, youthful. He's very much a virtuous young man, I think, even though he's kind of embellishing this story. You know, he has his principles and so on. And so there's a sense, you know, it's going to take a lot for him to change. He grew up in a very stable home, a loving home, a happy home. You know, these are all kind of very solid anchors for him and all the narratives around there. It seems like Rostov's going to be, there's really nothing to kind of nudge him out of this whole track he's on. Andrei's a little bit different. You know, we've seen a lot of Andrei. Let's first just finish this interaction with between Prince Andrei and Rostov. Prince Andrei says to him, I'll say this to you. You wish to insult me, and I'm quite prepared to agree that it would be not difficult for you to do so, should you be deficient in self-respect. But you will agree that the time and place are exceedingly ill-chosen. However, he said, getting up, you know my name and where to find me. But bear in mind, he added, that I do not consider either myself or you to have been insulted. And my advice as a man older than you is to let the matter drop. Only after Prince Andrei had gone did Rostov think of what he ought to have said. And he was still more angry for not having said it. He immediately ordered his horse to be brought around, and after coldly taking leave of Boris rode off. Whether to go to the headquarters the next day and challenge that pretentious little adjutant to a duel, or to let the matter drop, was a question that tormented him all the way back. At one moment he thought with animosity of the pleasure it would give him to see the fright of that proud, weak little man when facing his pistol. The next moment he felt with amazement that of all the men he knew, there was no one he would rather have as a friend than that same detestable little adjutant. And so I'm going to just skip over Rostov now, and I want to talk about Andrei. It seems to me these experiences in the army are having, there's more potential for positive or significant change in Andrei. And I too, of these group of young men we've seen, I would want to be Andrei's friend. We were first introduced to him in a very cool and cold way. And so I think that sort of set the tone of our perception of him as being someone little suspect, I think, in our minds. But slowly and slowly we're getting all these interactions with him. You know how warm and caring he was. Like there was a genuine authenticity between him and his sister. And you could see there's something there. And her comment, you know, you had changed. And so we get to see that, you know, this sort of funk, this depression, this sort of state of mind he's in, this is really not the core of Andrei. There's been some trigger in his mind, and he's in this depression state. And even with his wife, after, you know, remember that time, after with his sister, you know, patting her head, very naturally and kindly. You know, there was a history of a very warm relationship there. You know, Kutuzov was one of his most liked adjutants. Remember how he helped that woman on the road as he was traveling up the road? And there's been a number of instances how he stopped and despite the fear, despite everyone else freaking out, he helped Tushin in the middle of that battle. And Tushin was, you know, just tearfully thankful just a few moments later, you know, in passing to him. So it's interesting with Andrei. At Andrei, we were set right at the beginning to sort of be critical of him with good reason, but then we're getting all these glimpses of a man with a greater potential and more hard to read perhaps, but also someone that seems much more interesting to me. And I'm going to certainly defend him, and not to brush away the criticisms that we have of him. But I find him much more of an interesting character than Rostov. Rostov is certainly hilarious. And it's wonderful to see him and his family worried about him, and his mother just very naturally, you know, he's number one in her heart kind of thing, and how excited they are for him and how excited he is to write them back and, you know, tell of his exploits in the army. Obviously, you know, embellishing it and not at all putting it in a bad light. And we get to see his little brother. Remember how his little brother was reacting in chapter 6. I didn't make mention of it. How he was kind of like, very much like Nikolai would be, or was, very kind of rah-rah. Anyway, I kind of, yeah, I really enjoyed these last couple chapters. Since that chapter where Maria was able to kind of fortunately, luckily, skillfully, involuntarily, with nudges, say no to marry Anatol, and it's kind of this vibe of all these characters. But yeah, I'm kind of interested. If I'm sure you read it a little bit differently, but I'm kind of, I feel very much cheering for some of these characters more than others, and I like many of the characters. Natasha's very likable. Nikolai is even likable in his own way, but you know, kind of a it describes him as being childish a little bit. And Andrei intrigues me. I feel much akin with Andrei. But anyway, that's enough words for these couple chapters. That was chapter 6 and 7.